Hey guys, tonight we descend into the shifting sands of ancient Egypt, into a tomb so old the walls can barely hold their own secrets anymore. You light your torch, or maybe just picture one in your hand because it's quieter that way, and step down stone stairs that have creaked beneath 1,000 sandals. Your breath joins the dust as it curls upward, catching in rays of light that slice through the darkness like golden thread. The scent here is a mix of aged resin and something faintly furry. You crouch low, entering a chamber that smells like burnt honey and linen. The torch flickers, and that's when you see it. A small figure wrapped in linen, nestled into its own miniature sarcophagus. Two painted green eyes stare up at you from a gilded mask. It's a cat, not just any cat, a mummified cat, with eyeliner. Thick, black, dramatic kohl that would have made Cleopatra blink twice. And if that doesn't give you pause, maybe this will. This perfectly preserved feline has a better burial outfit than you'll ever wear to a job interview. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And while we drift through this oddly glamorous animal afterlife, drop a comment telling me your city and local time, just to see how far we've all wandered from our own deserts. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You edge deeper into the tomb and suddenly realize something odd. You're not alone. No, not ghosts, though we could pretend. It's the eyes, carved eyes, painted eyes, beaded ceramic obsidian. Dozens of animal eyes stare at you from statues, from wall reliefs, from clay jars. You step past a shelf that holds a falcon wrapped in linen strips, like a burrito of reverence. Next to it, a dog curled delicately in a resting pose, so expertly bound in bandages that you swear it's just asleep. And then you notice it, how human it all feels. In Western imagination, Egypt gets painted in broad strokes, pyramids, pharaohs, golden masks, the occasional curse. But no one ever tells you about the pets, about how people like you once wept over their cats, dressed them in tiny collars, and gave them burials with more flair than some nobles. And if you're wondering, yes, it was absolutely a thing to mummify your pet. Now don't panic. You probably won't survive this emotionally if you have a pet waiting at the foot of your bed right now, especially if it's giving you that look, you know, the one, the where's my sacred tomb look. But press on, because as you navigate this tunnel of tales and tales, the story gets stranger. There's evidence that some pets were entombed alongside their humans, not just placed beside, but given their own canopic jars. Imagine someone putting your dog's liver in a tiny painted vessel guarded by a jackal-headed god, all because you couldn't bear the thought of going into the afterlife without them. You tiptoe past one such jar now. It's shaped like a baboon's head. The lid is slightly askew. You decide not to fix it. The air is heavier now, not with fear, but with reverence. You begin to notice that the animals weren't just honored, they were sometimes worshipped. And this is where it starts to blur. Pet or deity companion or divine emissary. A small plaque on the wall shows an owner kneeling before a cat, not holding it, not petting it, worshipping it. You chuckle. Of course, you think cat owners haven't changed in 3,000 years. But then a deeper question curls into your mind like incense smoke. Were these animals family? Or were they function? Historians still argue whether ancient Egyptians truly saw these animals as pets in the modern sense, creatures of affection, of joy, of shared home life, or whether they served more ritualistic roles. Were they adopted for love or for the god's favor? You pause in front of a dog mummy with golden ears painted onto its shroud. Its pose is relaxed like it fell asleep mid-chase. Was it someone's best friend or an offering selected and raised solely to be sacrificed? The deeper you go, the more varied it gets. Not all mummies are equal. Some are sloppily wrapped, others are swaddled like royalty. One cat even has a tiny necklace made of faience beads. Another is wrapped in a lattice so intricate it resembles a chessboard. You kneel, run your fingers near, not on the fabric, and wonder what kind of person spent hours perfecting a diamond pattern just for a cat. There's a flicker of torchlight and it hits the gilded mask of yet another feline, this one painted with delicate whiskers. The artist cared. Someone somewhere wanted that cat to be remembered not just as a cat, but as their cat. You walk a little slower now, not wanting to disturb the silence. It's the silence of thousands of lives stilled and honored, of creatures given names, food homes, and eventually rituals of parting so elaborate it makes modern farewells look like footnotes. You pass a niche in the wall filled with canopic jars shaped like hippos and ibises. You notice tiny carvings, fur lines, scales, even smiles. Some of them don't seem practical, just loving, like someone wanted to preserve not just a body but a personality. And just before the corridor turns, your foot brushes something small, a doll. No dog toy, no way. But there it is, a worn bit of shaped linen stuffed with straw, possibly once scented with myrrh or mint. It's not labeled. But you know what it is. Someone left it for a friend. You take another slow breath, letting the earthy scent of dust and old linen settle in your lungs. Somewhere above you, the desert stretches on in sun-bleached silence, but down here it's a different world entirely. The walls shimmer with faded paint murals of people crouching beside animals, arms around them, faces tilted in something between adoration and awe. You follow one of the scenes, your fingers hovering near the sandstone surface. A young man is feeding a dog from a carved bowl. A child holds out a papyrus fan for a baboon. And in the center, a regal woman reclines beneath a lotus-framed window, a cat curled beside her, its tail coiled like a bracelet. You've wandered into the lives of Egypt's elite, where pets were more than companions. They were extensions of status, symbols of the household's wealth and refinement. You imagine yourself strolling along the garden paths of a villa. Near Thebes, linen robes rustling, followed by a procession of exotic creatures, greyhounds with polished collars, a monkey on a silk leash, and birds that sing better than your Spotify playlist. You glance into a small alcove, and there it is, a pet register of sorts etched into stone. It lists animals kept in a noble's estate: 2 cats, 1 hound, 3 geese, a trained baboon. It reads like a guest list to a very strange dinner party. But here's the thing, these weren't just for show. Pets in elite households were involved. They were named, they were bathed, they were pampered. Some were even buried with miniature amulets to protect them in the afterlife. One inscription nearby names a dog Abutiyu, possibly the oldest recorded pet name in history. His tomb was commissioned by a pharaoh. Yes, a pharaoh. That's how beloved he was. You might name your pet after a fruit or a Marvel character. These people gave them honorifics and state-funded tombstones. You step through another low archway into a chamber stacked with shelves carved directly into the wall. Each shelf holds a different animal in repose. A cat with its ears perked, a gazelle with delicately folded legs, a monkey curled into its own tail. The craftsmanship varies. Some are rough-rushed, but a few are exquisite. You pause before one that's clearly seen care. Its bandages have been arranged to mimic fur patterns. The head is wrapped with surgical precision, and someone painted tiny dots where the whiskers used to be. This isn't function, it's affection. The higher classes had the means to honor their animals in grand eternal gestures. Linen wasn't cheap. Neither was natron, the salt used to dry out bodies. And yet they spared no expense, which means the bond must have been real, or at least publicly valuable. Remember, this is a world where image mattered, where death was just a more elaborate stage for your life's narrative. So a pet buried with elegance told a story. We were refined. We were loving. We were close to the gods. If you could afford to embalm your cat in gold leaf, why not? Eternity is a long time to go without your favorite lap warmer. You walk past a pedestal where a statuette of Bastet rests, carved from sleek black basalt. The feline goddess, half cat, half woman, smiles with something between mischief and mercy. She was the guardian of homes, of women, of joy and fertility, but also cats, and that made cats sacred by association. You can almost feel her watching you, not in a spooky way, more like a protective librarian checking that you aren't scuffing the tile. She was everywhere in elite homes, painted on walls, sculpted in amulets engraved into mirrors. Bastet was the patron of happy households, and by extension, their furriest members. Historians still argue whether the reverence for animals among elites came purely from religious devotion or whether it was about status signaling, because the line between piety and prestige in ancient Egypt pretty thin. The wealthier you were, the more you could worship. Or was it the other way around? You pass an odd little figure carved into ivory, a monkey offering a fruit bowl. It's been worn smooth by time, but the joy is still there in the shape of its posture. Baboons were notoriously hard to handle, but that didn't stop the upper class from trying. Some were trained to pour wine, others played instruments, and some, well, mostly just threw figs at guests. You sigh, not all traditions need reviving. You stop at a niche painted with floral garlands. A dog lies at the feet of a noble couple. Its name is written underneath in hieroglyphs Hakenu, roughly joy. The dog's pose is almost photographic, head tilted, one paw raised. You swear you can still see its personality in the brushstrokes. The affection is clear. Whether it was about divine protection, aesthetic taste, or simple human love, it's carved in every gesture, every painted furrow. These animals mattered, not just to the gods, but to the people who fed them, walked them, whispered secrets into their ears at night. The air around you feels warmer, not from the torch, but from something deeper. You're not just looking at history, you're looking at hearts that beat like yours, even if those hearts belong to a cat that got fanfare at its funeral. You pause for a moment, let your feet rest. You sit beside a stone bench, more shrine than seat, and look around. No drama here, no pharaohs rising, just a room full of echoes and fur. A room that says, we remembered them, and we hoped someone would remember us too. You follow the next corridor and the light shifts. Somewhere behind you, the soft echo of your footsteps fades into something quieter, like purring. You smile, but you don't turn around. If the ancient Egyptians had their way, cats still walk these hallways long after the flesh is gone. And here in the land of Bastet, they don't just linger, they reign. You step into a chamber awash in faded gold. The walls are covered from floor to ceiling with delicate paintings, many of which showcase one figure again and again, a cat seated with perfect posture, eyes slanted like secrets. Sometimes the cat sits beneath a throne, sometimes beside a woman dressed in linen so fine it could have been air. Sometimes the cat holds a sistrum, a sacred rattle in its paws. You're standing in the shadow of Bastet. Her cult once had an entire city, Bubastas, dedicated to her worship. The city name even translates roughly to House of Bastet, as if she had a zip code. Pilgrims came from across Egypt, some carrying offerings wrapped in linen, tiny cat figurines, jars of perfumed oil, and yes, actual mummified cats. You walk past a pile of them, carefully arranged like logs at a campsite. Except these logs have paws. You crouch by one of the bundles. It's barely a foot long. The linen is stiff with age, but the pattern is meticulous diamond cross wrappings with a tiny clay bead where the nose might be. It's hard not to feel something tenderness or maybe reverence. This wasn't done casually. This was a holy act. Cats weren't pets in the way we think of them. They were manifestations of Bastit's grace. Killing one even by accident was punishable by death. There are recorded instances of mobs attacking travelers who harmed a feline even unintentionally. That's loyalty you don't buy with tuna. Historians still argue whether the cat's role was spiritual, practical, or both. On one hand, cats controlled pests. They protected grain stores. On the other hand, they were protectors in a more symbolic sense. Guardians of the home, banishers of chaos. In a world where so much was uncertain, a cat might be the steadiest presence in your life. You move deeper into the chamber and find a low pedestal at the center. Upon it sits a bronze statue of Bastet, her feline face serene, her ears high. Around her neck hangs a protective amulet, and in her hand she holds an ankh, the symbol of life. You notice scratches along the base, not damage, names. Pilgrims had etched prayers hoping for healing, for fertility, for joy. You run your fingers over one line carved deeper than the rest. It's a name. Perhaps of someone who lost a child, or maybe just wanted their daughter to laugh again. And nearby, a paw print perfectly preserved in ancient plaster. Did someone press their cat's foot into the stone? You imagine the moment, a sunlit morning, a soft mule, a still hand cradling fur. Cats were often given names that reflected their divine connection, names like Sweet Voice Sunlight or Eye of the Moon. These weren't mere labels, they were devotions in a single word. And when these cats died, because even sacred companions aren't immortal, they were mourned. Owners shaved their eyebrows in grief. Think about that. Not a quick ceremony, not a shrug, a visible public sign of sorrow. For weeks, maybe months, you'd walk around with bare brows, a billboard for heartbreak. It's quiet in here. You lie down on a stone slab once likely used to prepare offerings and stare up at the painted ceiling. A procession of cats walks across it in a celestial parade. Some carry lotus flowers, others wear gold collars. All stride forward elegant and unhurried. Your breath slows to match their pace. You picture one curled beside a child at night, or brushing past a priest's leg during a blessing, or simply sitting on a sunlit step, blinking at the world, as if it's all old news. Some of the most elaborate mummified cats come from this period. CT scans have shown linen packed so precisely, it rivals modern surgical technique. Some were buried with milk bowls, others with toys. You'd think it was overkill until you remember how many people today keep urns of ashes on their mantles or tattoo paw prints on their skin. We haven't changed that much. You slide your hand along the edge of the slab. There are faint depressions, claw marks, not from fear, but perhaps from a cat, placed there before wrapping, stretching one last time. Or maybe it's wishful thinking. Your mind softened by candlelight and limestone starts to see everything as sacred. Maybe that's how the ancients felt too. Suddenly you think of all the moments a cat makes sacred without even trying. That warm weight on your lap when the world is collapsing. The soft vibration of a purr when you can't sleep. The nudge of a forehead against your chin. In ancient Egypt, those moments weren't dismissed, they were preserved. One final mural catches your eye before you rise. It shows a family gathered around a fire, and in the center, not a human child, but a cat receiving food from each member. The parents kneel, the children reach, and the cat, head high, tail arched, accepts it all as its due. You exhale through a smile, still checks out. You rise slowly from the stone slab, brushing your fingertips against the etched paw print once more before stepping into the next hallway. The air here is cooler, less perfumed by incense or age. It's not as adorned. This isn't a chamber of worship or elite devotion. This is the space where pets became something else entirely, offerings. Rows of shelves stretch out before you, built low to the ground, as if meant for smaller hands or smaller bodies. Lining these tiers are bundles, hundreds, maybe thousands, wrapped in linen tight and neat. You approach cautiously. These aren't the golden-coated, amulet-cradled darlings of nobles. These are temple mummies, mass-produced, mass-offered, mass-hoped. Because by the later dynasties, pets especially, cats had become big business. You kneel beside a bundle barely the length of your forearm. The linen is stained at the edges, rougher to the touch. No decorative pattern, just layers and layers of winding cloth. Oh, you pick up the faintest scent of resin, and underneath, bone. You shift your weight as your knees begin to ache. Yes, even in ancient tombs, your modern body reminds you it hasn't done yoga in years, and look around. There's a rhythm to this room, a quiet pulse beneath the silence. Every bundle, every shelf says the same thing we believed. People didn't just come to temples to pray. They came with animals, or more often the remains of animals, offered as intercessors to the gods. It's as if the divine was more likely to listen when the message was delivered by a meow. And that's not far off. Egyptians believed animals, especially those sacred to particular deities, could carry prayers. And the more devout your offering, the better your chances. Historians still debate the extent of this practice. Some say the mummification was symbolic, a ritual act. Others argue it was commercial temples breeding, killing, and mummifying animals en masse to meet demand. Archaeologists have found underground catacombs containing hundreds of thousands of animal mummies. One even included birds and tiny crocodiles stacked like divine Amazon packages. You hesitate. That sounds unsettling. Sacred turned industrial. Love turned ledger. But then again, it depends on who's holding the linen. You press your palm against the wall beside you, and the stone is warm, not with heat, but with memory. Somewhere someone knelt here, clutching a bundle just like the ones before you, whispering something too private for hieroglyphs. Maybe they had no gold, no priest's blessing, just a hope wrapped in fur. You walk slowly now, letting your shoes scuff a trail in the dust. Each step kicks up the faint smell of natron sharp, almost like baking soda, and something deeper like cedar wood oil left too long in a bottle. It's the smell of preservation, of refusing to forget. At the far end of the corridor, you spot an open crate, half collapsed, revealing its contents. Inside, dozens of mummified kittens. Their wrappings are simple but clean, each marked with a dot of red dye. Maybe to tell them apart, or maybe just to say, "We saw you." You lean over the crate, exhaling slowly. The kittens weren't bred for cuddles. They were raised to serve, to die young, and to be offered by strangers with trembling hands and ancient hopes. You remember a papyrus fragment from your high school textbook, or was it a documentary describing how some mummified animals turned out to be empty? Just linen? Or bone powder, like souvenirs made in haste? For centuries, scholars assumed this was sacrilegious fraud. But now some argue it may have been symbolic, a stand-in. The gesture mattered more than the guts. You walk past another bundle, this one larger, probably a dog. The wrapping job is uneven, like it was done quickly. No gilded mask, no bronze label. But still it's here. That counts for something. Not all of these animals were strays caught in nets. Some scholars believe were bred in temple precincts, raised gently, fed well, and then ritually sacrificed. It wasn't cruel in their eyes, it was sacred, a cycle, life, gift, eternity. Still you frown a little. The modern part of you recoils. This is devotion crossed with death, comfort entwined with control. You wonder if the priest who performed the rite wept even once, or if it was just routine. But then again, modern eyes always squint too hard in the dark. You lean against a pillar carved with delicate lotus vines. A cat sits beneath the leaves, almost playful. Above it, a prayer may bastet, carry your words to Ra. A divine courier, padded and purring. You imagine walking into a temple years ago with your only coin spent, but your hands full a tiny animal swaddled like a child. You pass it to a priest, eyes shining with promise. Not everyone had a voice. But maybe their cat did. The room breathes around you. The bundles seem to stir, not with life, but with layers of belief. Thousands of them. Each one a message, each one a prayer. You glance back once more before exiting the room. It's not what you'd call comforting, but it's honest. Death wasn't a wall here, it was a door, and sometimes the key was covered in fur. You step into the next chamber and suddenly the walls rise higher. The air thickens and the silence gets velvet. It's not just quiet, it's temple quiet. The kind of quiet that makes you instinctively soften your footsteps. Here the pets aren't bundled en masse or laid out for commerce. Here they're cradled, honored, enshrined. You're in the hall of high pet status, and the vibe is pure reverence. The first thing you notice is the sarcophagus, not human-sized, but not small either. It's long, sleek, and coated in black lacquer. Gold hieroglyphs shimmer faintly across the top, and inlaid in the center is a figure with unmistakable ears. A dog, not a mutt, not a fetch-the-stick type. This one had titles. You walk around the base and spot the inscription. It's formal, stiff, but unmistakably affectionate. Beloved of the master keeper of the house sentinel at the gate. The dog's name is lost to time, likely buried under the eroded glyphs, but its loyalty wasn't. That was carved deep enough to last millennia. You crouch beside a pedestal, displaying a perfectly preserved baboon skull. It's small, delicate, with teeth like tiny sculpture tools. The sign nearby explains that this baboon once lived in the court of a pharaoh. Possibly played musical instruments. Definitely startled visiting diplomats. Historians still argue whether these court animals were true pets or performers, were they cherished or just trained well. But then you remember your childhood parrot. It screeched, constantly terrified the mailman, and had zero affection for anyone. And yet somehow it was family. You glance up and meet the gaze of a giant painted ibis. Regal, elegant, slightly smug. The ibis sacred to Thoth wasn't a pet in the cuddly sense, but many were kept in temple ponds, fed lavishly, and mummified with obsessive care. There's evidence some were even kept in household shrines, preening beside offerings and occasionally stealing shiny things. And then there it is, the cat, or rather that cat, a sculpture near life-size in black basalt. Its posture is perfect, back straight, eyes narrow, tail curled neatly around its paws. There's jewelry on its neck, real inlay, not painted. You can almost hear it thinking, "Of course I got buried like this." Beside it, a glass case housing one of the most famous pet coffins ever found. Inside it lay a cat named Tamiyu, beloved of Prince Thutmose, son of Pharaoh Amenhotep III. She had her own limestone sarcophagus decorated with lotus petals and adorned with carved prayers. That's not pet status, that's dynastic status. You try to picture the moment this was all arranged. A prince mourning, a court suddenly hushed, priests summoned, artisans paid, all for a creature whose life probably revolved around sunbeams and leftover goose. But then again, loss always demands ceremony no matter the species. One of the plaques notes that some elite pets were even buried in tombs near their owners, with their own grave goods, collars, toys, treats. And for the especially beloved Shabti figures, little statues meant to serve the pet in the afterlife. You pause at that. Imagine loving a creature so much you prepare it help in the next world. A dog with its own staff, a cat with minions. In this hall, you realize the afterlife wasn't just for kings. It was for companionship. You take a seat on a stone bench, breathing in the scent of old resin and cool dust. You imagine the silence not as absence, but as memory suspended. Someone whispered a name here once. Someone cried. Someone pressed a kiss to linen and asked the gods for peace. And yes, this is ancient Egypt we're talking about, where preparing for the afterlife was practically a full-time job. But still, it's different when it's a pet. The grief is quieter, but no less sharp. You walk toward another alcove and find a delicate glass bowl blue-green with age. Inside are the remnants of a fish, one that had been wrapped, preserved, and buried beside a young girl. The caption suggests it was her favorite, and honestly, if you've ever watched a kid cry over a goldfish, this makes total sense. What we're seeing here laid bare in wrappings and resin is something that even time doesn't erase the fact that animals weren't just useful. They were loved deeply, personally. One final exhibit catches your eye. It's small, unassuming, a pair of footprints in clay side by side. One is human, the other unmistakably feline. No label, no date, just impressions. You stare at them longer than expected, because here in this echo of a hallway is the clearest message yet. You weren't meant to walk alone. Not in this world, and maybe not in the next either. You follow the corridor as it narrows again, the stone beneath your feet smoothing out with wear as if thousands of soft sandals once brushed this same path. The flicker of torchlight from a sconce you didn't notice earlier dances over the next chamber's walls, revealing something unexpected. Murals, not just of gods or kings, but of animals, specifically pets, rendered with shocking intimacy. You see a child cradling a small monkey, the two of them mid-giggle or something like it. Another shows a man sharing a meal with a dog, the bread between them almost absurdly detailed. And in one, an older woman sits beneath a fig tree, a cat curled against her lap, its tail draped over her knee like a promise. The colors have faded, yes, but the affection, it still crackles through the plaster. This was the private side of ancient Egypt, the side that didn't always make it into textbooks. And yet, here it is painted lovingly on tomb walls, often beside the more official scenes of harvesting offerings and grand declarations, because alongside the prayers and power, there was always someone's beloved furball. You trace a paw print painted into the corner of one mural and smile. It's slightly too big, a little clumsy. It's not divine, it's domestic. It's a detail so human you could swear the artist once had their own cat lounging on a warm brick somewhere in Memphis or Thebes. One inscription reads something that sticks with you. He kept me warm in winter and watched the door in summer. Just that. Not an epic, not a eulogy, but maybe the most honest epitaph ever carved into a wall. Historians still debate whether these murals were merely symbolic or represented actual relationships. Were these pets real companions or metaphors for loyalty, rebirth, comfort? But if you've ever known the weight of a sleeping animal across your chest on a stormy night, you already know the answer. You take a moment to sit against the wall, letting your shoulder brush against the painted cat with a crooked tail. It's not majestic, it's not symmetrical, it's real. You hear faintly the kind of sound that shouldn't carry through stone, a child's laugh. Or maybe it's your own memory echoing back, because somewhere once you were small, and there was something warm and four-legged that waited for you at the door every day. It's easy to romanticize all this, isn't it? To imagine pharaohs tossing squeaky toys or queens knitting beside tabby cats. But the truth is stranger and simpler. Ancient Egyptians didn't just admire animals, they welcomed them into their myths, homes, and tombs. Not for grandeur, for comfort. Some theories suggest this integration wasn't just emotional, it was magical. That pets, by being close to humans, absorbed pieces of the soul. So when they died, they weren't just buried, they were released, set loose in the afterlife to scout the path ahead. Guardians, guides, and perhaps familiar friends, waiting just past the veil. You rise and walk slowly along the edge of the room, noticing small grooves in the floor, not hieroglyphs, not tools, claw marks. A puppy, a panicked cat mid-hunt, or just a temple pet trying to play. The idea that this place once echoed with paws tiny or otherwise is oddly comforting. One relief carving in particular draws your eye. It's a scene of mourning. A woman kneels beside a wrapped form smaller than a child. Her hands are lifted not in lament but in offering. Beside her is the glyph for beloved repeated 3 times. The subject of this reverence a monkey. There's no palace in the background, no royal sigils, just grief. Pure and scaled perfectly to the creature lost. You can't help but think of how modern grief over pets is often dismissed, minimized. But here it was carved in stone, painted into eternity. Weeping over your dog wasn't indulgent, it was expected. You reach the far end of the hall and find an alcove almost hidden from view. No lights, just a cool hush. And there nestled in the corner is a simple sandstone box. No gold, no gem, but atop it a single word, etched gently, friend. You sit down, legs crossed. You stay a while, because sometimes that's enough. You leave the mural chamber behind, stepping into a quieter, cooler room, where the stone underfoot feels almost damp. The smell changes, less like sand and smoke, more like earth and linen. Here the walls are bare, no paintings, no gold, just shelves. And on those shelves rows and rows of animal coffins, neat, identical, disturbingly numerous. This is the warehouse of devotion, or perhaps of mass production. Each coffin is shaped like the animal inside a falcon, a snake, a tiny shrew, and the repetition is almost hypnotic. At first you marvel, then you frown, then you start asking questions, because suddenly the numbers don't feel personal anymore. You bend to inspect one of the coffins, a falcon carved with astonishing precision, wings tucked tight and eyes wide open. It's beautiful, reverent, but beside it 5 more falcons, and then 10, and then 30, stacked like sacred inventory. Turns out mummifying animals in ancient Egypt wasn't always about mourning a beloved pet. Sometimes it was about business. Historians still argue whether the animal mummy trade was devout or exploitative. The truth likely lies somewhere in between. By the later periods of Egyptian history, animal cults had exploded in popularity. Temples sold votive mummies, offerings you could purchase and present to a deity as a kind of divine bribe. Want a favor from Bastet? Buy a cat mummy. Hoping for safe travels? Try a baboon. It was spiritual vending, divine crowdfunding. You pay, you pray, the gods hopefully deliver, but that meant they needed a lot of animals. You walk the length of the room, eyes drifting over wooden coffins painted with cheap resin. You spot one that looks rushed, the eyes are crooked, the ears mismatched. A cat maybe, or a jackal with bad posture. Some of these animals weren't raised in homes. They were bred en masse for the sole purpose of being sacrificed and preserved. An ancient animal industry, sanctified but systematic. One cat mummy, x-rayed by modern archaeologists, was found to be empty. Just linen, no bones, just the shape of a cat. Like someone was faking the devotion to save on raw materials. You wince. Imagine buying a cat mummy for your grandma's health and realizing centuries later that it was stuffed with twigs and hope. There's a plaque on the far wall that tries to be diplomatic. It calls this room evidence of widespread devotional practice, but you feel the edges of unease creeping in. Was it faith or factory still? It's not all grim. One mummy near the center of the room stands apart. It's wrapped meticulously with a painted mask, amber beads around the neck, and a gilded plaque on the chest bearing the animal's name. A monkey, it seems. Maybe a temple performer. Maybe something more. Because even in systems that lean toward the cynical, there are still moments of tenderness. You remember the crooked cat mural, the paw prints in clay, the little girl's fish. You move past the rows and pause at a glass case set into the wall. Inside is a scroll papyrus, browned and flaking. It's a receipt, dated and stamped. Someone once paid a small fortune to have a goose mummified, wrapped in saffron and cedar oil, and laid to rest at the foot of a minor shrine. It's easy to laugh. A goose, really? But maybe it honked every morning just before sunrise. Maybe it waited at the door each day with a crooked waddle and a funny face. And when it died, something went quiet and stayed that way. So they paid the price. Because memory, even absurd memory, deserves a home. You turn to leave the chamber, your sandals brushing dust from the past. You're not angry at what you've seen, just wider-eyed. Even ancient civilizations had bureaucracy and supply chains and corners cut. But even so, behind every cat-shaped jar, every hawk coffin, every stack of snake mummies, was someone reaching for the divine. Clumsily, hopefully, sometimes cynically, still reaching. You step into the next space, and this one feels different. Less like a tomb, more like a studio. Sunlight somehow trickles in through slits in the stone ceiling, casting narrow beams across the room. The light hits piles of linen strips, shallow ceramic bowls filled with what looks like resin, and bundles of herbs, long since dried to crumbles. The air is thick with the ghost of cedar and bitumen. You've wandered into the mummification workshop, but not the kind you'd find in a pharaoh's pyramid. This one was meant for animals, pets, sacred offerings, sometimes both. And you can almost hear it, the rustle of linen, the murmur of priests reciting purification spells, the gentle hiss of hot resin poured over fur and bone. Here animals were prepared for eternity, and they were done so with a mix of astonishing skill and unnerving efficiency. Mummifying pets wasn't just a matter of wrapping them up and calling it holy. It was chemistry, precision, performance. Cats were usually dried with natron, a naturally occurring salt, that pulled out moisture, less poetic, more practical. Then they were anointed with oils packed with stuffing to keep their shape, and bound with linen in intricate patterns. You can picture a priest smoothing the strips over a tiny paw, tucking in whiskers, adjusting the tilt of the head, just so. One dog mummy discovered in Saqqara had a perfectly preserved snout, as if it had paused mid-sniff. Another, a bird of prey, was wrapped with its wings folded inward like a formal bow. But there were missteps, too. Historians still argue whether the more sloppily wrapped animals were due to time constraints, cost, or lower status. Some appear twisted, flattened, or even dismembered. One infamous crocodile mummy X-rayed in the 2000s revealed a jumble of baby croc bones all packed into one massive form, as if the priests had run out of time or simply gotten creative with leftovers. Still, the care in many of these preparations is unmistakable. You find yourself lingering near a low table where small figurines are laid out shapti for animals. Little carved servants meant to assist the pet in the afterlife. Yes, you heard that right. The pet got helpers, presumably to chase birds, fetch sandals, or perhaps just keep them company through eternity. And then there's the scent. The air here still carries that faint tang of pine and incense, sweet and bitter, all at once. It's the smell of permanence, of people trying to keep something alive by stopping it in its tracks. One corner of the room holds bundles that were never unwrapped animal mummies, buried with their human owners, a monkey buried beside a noblewoman, a lapdog tucked at the feet of a child. In one case, a gazelle believed to have belonged to a prince. Were these pets sacrificed to join their humans, or did they die naturally and earn a place through loyalty? Scholars disagree. Some say it was honor. Others say obligation. There's no consensus, only linen bones and the stories we stitch between them. You run your fingers lightly along the edge of a work table and imagine what it would have meant to trust someone with your pet's body, to hope that they'd wrap it not like a product but like a promise. Because these weren't just offerings, they were companions. And sometimes maybe they were the only ones who listened. The workshop is quiet now. The resin's hardened, the linen's still. but the intent hums through the walls. To prepare an animal this carefully to send it into the afterlife, with form, fragrance, and figurines, wasn't just about religion, it was about memory. You exhale slowly, the scent of long dead myrrh clinging to the back of your throat. And you understand now mummification wasn't just a technical act. It was emotional alchemy, the attempt to turn loss into legacy, fur into forever. You follow a corridor that narrows with every step until your shoulders nearly graze the walls. The sound of your breath grows louder in the cramped space, and then without warning, the path widens again, opening into a dim, low-ceilinged chamber, lit by what must have once been oil lamps. The soot still blackens the stone above, telling you this place was used a lot. This, it turns out, is the deposit room, or if you want to be dramatic about it, the great animal graveyard. Stacks of animal mummies line the walls from floor to ceiling. Cats, dogs, ibises, even beetles. Wrapped, sealed, and arranged like the quietest, furriest library you've ever wandered into. It's eerie, but also oddly comforting. You crouch beside a linen-wrapped bundle the size of a shoebox. Its label, scratched into faded plaster, reads, "Simply beloved, no name, no species." Just that one word. It makes you wonder how many of these bundles were true pets grieved by someone. How many were spiritual bribes bought in bulk? Historians still argue whether these mass deposits were acts of devotion or just part of temple economics. Like a heavenly subscription plan. Offer one animal a month and increase your chances of divine favor. But you can't shake the feeling that among the thousands, there must have been at least a few that matter deeply. Maybe one bundle wrapped by a daughter for her pet goose. Maybe another placed by a priest whose cat used to nap on the papyrus scrolls. You imagine hands shaking slightly as they tied the final knot. There's a kind of democracy in this room. Pharaohs and farmers alike might have sent their animals here, because when it comes to grief, status doesn't save you. You spot a narrow alcove lined with canopic jars, yes, for animals. Apparently, it wasn't just humans who got the organ treatment. A baboon's liver might be removed, preserved, and stored beside tiny carvings of Thoth, the ibis-headed god of wisdom. And there's something oddly touching about that. That someone 3,000 years ago thought even an animal's organs were worth saving, worth protecting for the journey ahead. You lift your eyes and notice something you hadn't at first, a mural faint and partially chipped away, showing a boat on the Nile. In the boat, a man, a woman, and a large bird sitting comfortably at the bow. A family portrait, ancient style. You can almost hear the squawking. It's easy to laugh, but also, it isn't, because you've known pets that were more present than some people. You've whispered secrets into their ears, and maybe, just maybe, the Egyptians knew something we forgot, that the soul doesn't have to wear shoes. There's a crooked bundle near your feet, clearly sagging in the middle. You wonder if it was ever unwrapped, or if anyone today even knows what animal lies beneath. It could be sacred. It could be a scam. The lines are blurry now, like the edges of the painted figures on the wall. You take one last look before moving on. Not because the room is sad, but because it feels full of intention, of attempts, of that ancient, stubborn need to hold on. And maybe that's the whole point of this chamber, that in death, as in life, some things were always worth keeping close. Even if all you had left was fur and memory. You duck through a doorway worn smooth by centuries of footsteps, priests, mourners, tourists, maybe even thieves. This next space feels more like a hallway than a chamber, and lining both sides are long, low shelves carved directly into the stone. Most are empty now, but a few still hold what they were meant to preserve, bundles tightly wrapped the size of sleeping kittens. You pause beside one of them. The linen is brittle but intact, shaped like a small cat curled into a loaf ear's tail, all preserved in careful geometry. At first glance, it looks peaceful, but then you notice something unsettling. The angle of the skull beneath the cloth isn't quite right. You've just stumbled into one of the oldest debates in ancient Egyptian animal mummification. Were these animals truly loved, or were they offerings bred, killed, and wrapped in massive numbers purely to satisfy religious demand? Historians still argue whether most animal mummies were the result of affection or ritual. The answer, as always, is probably both. But the reality is messier. In the heyday of Egypt's animal cults from around 700 BCE to the rise of the Roman Empire, the demand for animal mummies skyrocketed. Pilgrims journeyed from across the country and sometimes beyond to offer sacred creatures to the gods. It was a bit like lighting a candle in a cathedral, except instead of wax, you brought a bird in linen, and someone had to supply all those mummies. So began what modern scholars now call the animal mummy industry. There were breeding facilities, mass enclosures, even dedicated animal priests whose entire job was to raise, sacrifice, and mummify animals for temple use. In one site, archaeologists found over 1.7 million ibis mummies. That's not devotion, that's logistics. You picture it, a temple courtyard filled with cages, the air thick with squawking and fur, and the unmistakable smell of creatures kept too long in the sun. And somewhere in that crowd, perhaps a child clutching her one real pet, a dog that shared her meals, a monkey that slept by her cot, a cat that once batted dried lotus petals across the floor. Were all the mummies equal in meaning? Absolutely not. Some were hollow, literally. CT scans reveal many animal mummies are just bundles of feathers, straw, or even clay. A few were shockingly elaborate fakes. One bundle, once assumed to be a sacred falcon, turned out to contain a stick. You chuckle. It's like selling a candle that never burns just to comfort someone's grief. Absurd, but also human. Because in the tension between faith and fraud, you see something familiar, the aching need to do something, to offer something, to feel like you participated in meaning, even when it's wrapped in illusion. You reach out and gently touch one of the shelf edges. The stone is worn in a smooth dip from thousands of hands before yours. Were they grieving, hopeful, guilty? You don't know. You don't. But as you walk on, you realize the question you started with. Was it love or ritual? Might not matter, because in the end, the effect is the same. Something was remembered. Something was preserved. And in these narrow halls among animals both honored and commodified, you're surrounded by proof that even 3,000 years ago, no one really wanted to say goodbye. You step out of the narrow passage and into a courtyard that's half open to the sky. The light hits you like a silent cymbal, scattering shadows across carved stone and sun-baked dust. It takes a moment for your eyes to adjust, then you see them. Shrines. Not towering obelisks or royal statues this time. These are small, almost humble, cubes of stone barely waist-high with niches just large enough for a statuette or offering bowl. Some are cracked, others still hold faint traces of red ochre or blue pigment. This is where the gods received their animals, specifically the animal forms they were believed to inhabit. You walk slowly, letting your fingers trail along one shrine's edge. A faint engraving remains, the sleek outline of a cattail curled like a question mark. Not just any cat, Bastet, the goddess of home fertility and in later eras protection. Worshipping Bastet wasn't just about owning a cat. It meant aligning yourself with order, warmth, and the chaotic serenity of feline existence. But she wasn't the only one. There was Thoth, god of wisdom, represented by the ibis. Sobek, the crocodile god of strength and ferocity. Anubis, often shown as a jackal guardian of cemeteries and the underworld. Even Hathor, goddess of music and motherhood, could appear as a cow. The Egyptians didn't just worship animals, they saw divinity in them. And not metaphorically, literally. Many believed that certain animals housed the souls of gods. that petting a temple cat wasn't just comforting, it was sacred. You pause by a worn plinth where a lion cub statue once stood. Sekhmet, goddess of war and healing. Her animal avatars, it's believed, were treated like royalty. Some lived in temple compounds, fed fine meats adorned with jewelry, even buried in special tombs when they died. Historians still debate how many of these animals were truly revered versus how many were symbolic placeholders. Was that ibis in the courtyard just one of thousands? Or was it the actual vessel of Thoth's divine wisdom? There's no clear answer, and maybe that's the point. In a world where gods walked among people and sometimes purred on their laps, drawing hard lines between sacred and mundane didn't make sense. You crouch beside a corner altar where remnants of burned resin stain the stone. You imagine someone kneeling here thousands of years ago, holding a bundle to their chest. Maybe a cat that lived a long life. Maybe a hawk bred for sacrifice. Either way, it was placed here offered with hope. Hope for protection, hope for health. Hope that some invisible thread still connected the living to the sacred. You glance up at the sky, a slab of blue framed by sandstone. And for a moment, you understand. The Egyptians didn't separate animals from gods. They believed the divine curled up in fur, slithered through reeds and blinked back at you with golden eyes. Maybe they weren't wrong. Maybe that's why you're still here, wandering through their temples, whispering to linen-wrapped ghosts. Because part of you still hopes the sacred lives on in memory, in ritual, in the soft beat of a tale against stone. You find yourself drawn toward a low tunnel carved beneath the far side of the courtyard, barely shoulder height, echoing like a whisper. You stoop and shuffle in, blinking into the gloom, guided by a steady draft of air that smells faintly of crushed flowers and time-worn cloth. The tunnel opens into a room much colder than you expect, and not just in temperature, it feels still, weighted. You stop sensing the shift, and then your eyes settle on the centerpiece, a single sarcophagus. Small, child-sized, animal-sized. It rests on a raised dais flanked by faded wall paintings that seem almost unfinished. One shows a bird perched on a priest's outstretched hands. Another, more detailed, shows a jackal standing vigil beside a sleeping figure, its eyes full of something between sorrow and duty. You've entered a special tomb. Not mass burial, not offering cash. This is personal. The sarcophagus bears the likeness of a dog, long snout, ears upright, a noble curve to the back. The paint is flaking, but it's unmistakable, and above it, etched into the stone in hieroglyphs, "He who ran beside me." You exhale slowly. This was not factory sacrifice. This was grief. Historians still argue whether Egyptians truly loved their animals the way we do, or whether their affection was purely religious. But finds like this suggest something deeper: bonds, companionship, loyalty remembered with ceremony and stone. You imagine the men who buried this dog, maybe a soldier home from war, maybe a merchant who lost everything but still had this creature curled at his feet every night. Maybe someone who, when everyone else left, still had one tail that wagged, and he remembered, not with tears alone, but with ritual, with permanence, with the kind of care we usually reserve for royalty. You walk slowly around the sarcophagus and notice the details: a collar carved with lotus petals, inlays of lapis lazuli where the eyes once gleamed. Someone poured wealth and time into this, and love. It's a reminder that sometimes the most beautiful tombs are not for kings or gods, but for those who made life bearable in their shadow. You sit down on a nearby ledge, the cool stone pressing through your clothes. Your fingers drift across the floor and land on something smooth, an amulet maybe, scarab-shaped, still intact. You don't take it, but you hold it for a while. It's easy to think of history as distant, dusty, academic, but in this room it feels tender. Recent, like the man who said goodbye to this dog might still be walking just a few steps ahead of you. And maybe he is, because to mummify a pet wasn't just about death, it was about belief. That loyalty survived, that companionship mattered, that there was a place for even the smallest love in the architecture of eternity. You stand slowly, the air shifts, a faint rustle that might be sand, or a sigh. You nod once to the figure in stone, and leave the room a little quieter than you entered. You step back into the warmth, blinking at the sudden brightness, like someone surfacing from underwater memory. The temple sprawls ahead in fractured geometry columns, like tree trunks, corridors twisting like forgotten rivers. But now you're heading toward one of the most peculiar places in the entire complex. A vault, not for gold, not for scrolls, but for mummies, animal mummies, stacked like archives, catalogued like records of prayer. This is the catacomb of the sacred creatures. You descend slowly, stone steps damp with condensation, each one just slightly too narrow, as if built for feet far daintier than yours. The walls squeeze in, the air grows thick, and then you reach the chamber. It's vast, a subterranean cathedral of shelves, layer upon layer, each filled with bundles, long ones, fat ones, miniature ones wrapped so precisely they look like art pieces, or perhaps ancient burritos if you're feeling irreverent. And you probably are, because there's something comically bureaucratic about it all. Hundreds of thousands of mummified animals stored with clerical precision, like a divine accounting department filed every prayer and receipt. This isn't a legend, it's a fact. The most famous of these sites is at Saqqara, where the catacombs of Anubis hold an estimated 8 million dog mummies. 8 million. Historians still debate how the ancient Egyptians maintained such massive breeding and embalming operations. Was it state-run, temple-funded? Were there quotas who decided which puppy got a linen burial and which one became stew? The answers are partial at best, but the scale speaks volumes. You wander past shelf after shelf, each bundle whispering a version of the same story. Someone believed this creature mattered, enough to wrap it, bury it, preserve it forever. Of course, not every mummy here was made with care. Some are crude, rushed, flimsy cloth, barely more than a gesture. Others are elaborate nested layers of fine linen hieroglyphs, inscribed with reed pens, even false eyes painted on the wrappings to mimic the living face of the animal inside. And some are empty, literally. Scans of these catacombs have revealed numerous dummy mummies, just straw or feathers, sometimes nothing but bundled air. Whether due to fraud, haste, or shortage, we may never know. But it's a little like buying a prayer candle and discovering it's just a tube of wax with no wick. Still, people offered them, hoped with them, tied their anxieties and dreams to these linen ghosts. You pause by a particularly well-preserved bundle, clearly a bird, likely a falcon. Its wings are wrapped close to its sides, its head elevated, as if preparing for flight even in death. You imagine the priest who laid it down. Maybe he murmured a spell. Maybe he simply nodded already. Thinking about the next, it's easy to romanticize. But this was industry, devotional, profitable, perhaps even exploitative. And yet, beneath all that, sincerity still lingers, because the Egyptians didn't just bury animals to please the gods. They buried them to connect with the divine in a tangible, living way. To say, I touched something sacred, I honored it, and I want it to remember me too. You lean back against the wall of the chamber, cool limestone, a silence thick as cotton. Somewhere above ground, a jackal howls, or maybe it's just the wind. But here, among a thousand whispers, you start to feel it, a faith so physical, it needed fur and feathers to make sense. You take one last glance back at the catacombs before ascending. The shadows cling to your ankles like They aren't quite ready to let you go. Like the weight of so many silent lives has found its way into your bones. Above ground again, the sun feels too loud, the stones too bright. But you keep walking, following the scent of resin and desert air until you find what looks like a collapsed chapel. Half-roofed, sand-dusted, yet unmistakably ceremonial. Here you're stepping into something even stranger, a mummification workshop. Think less cleanroom lab, more divine butcher shop meets perfumery. Clay basins, burned residue in long troughs, broken amphorae still sticky with ancient resins, and in one corner, the remnant of a shallow pit lined with natron, a kind of ancient salt used to dry out bodies. You've seen it before in the context of human embalming, but here it was repurposed for pets and sacred animals. Yes, you're standing in a place where puppies were packed in salt. You try not to imagine their little bodies stiffening under layers of powder, but the truth lingers. Not every animal was a beloved companion. Many were raised to die. Historians still argue how widespread this was, whether animal cults crossed into mass production. But archaeological finds are telling. Excavations at sites like Tuna El Gabel and Saqqara reveal thousands of animal bones showing signs of strangulation, skull trauma, even neck dislocation. It wasn't always merciful. Sometimes it was mechanical. But then again, so is any ritual done at scale. You move carefully between broken jars and dried reeds, your fingers trailing over surfaces worn smooth by centuries of labor. On one table, a small copper hook used to remove the brain through the nasal passage. Yes, even for animals, even for cats. The process mimicked human preparation, evisceration, drying, perfuming, wrapping, decorating. All of it meticulously documented. Some animal mummies were even buried with death certificates, stamped by temple officials declaring the offering valid and accepted. There's something almost corporate about it. Sacred receipts, divine bureaucracy. And yet again, it's not all grim, because amid the utilitarian remains, you spot something small. A linen-wrapped figurine, not an animal this time. A child carved in sycamore wood barely the length of your hand, tucked between two jars as if someone left it in secret, as if one priest, perhaps weary of routine, needed to remember why any of this mattered, that even ritual should have heart. You crouch beside the offering, the wind brushing sand into the folds of your clothing, and you wonder, did they cry, those priests? Did they grow numb? Did they say a quick prayer under their breath as they prepared yet another body? Or was it all just habit? You'll never know. But the silence here is telling. It's not empty. It's full of things no one bothered to write down. The quiet grief of repetition, the pride in precision, the occasional defiance of someone who wrapped a hawk with extra care even if the schedule didn't allow for it. You rise slowly, stepping out into the open sun once again. It stings now, this light. It doesn't feel cleansing, just raw. You squint toward the horizon where the temple shadows end and the sand begins. And it occurs to you, even in death, these creatures were placed with purpose, aligned, directed, as if their afterlives were destinations, and these rituals, the tickets. Maybe that's why you came here, not for answers, but for orientation, a reminder that even fleeting lives can leave permanent lines in the stone. You follow a faint path now barely visible, between crumbled stones and drifting sand toward what the locals call the House of Birds. That's not a nickname. It's a literal translation of inscriptions found on the temple wall nearby. And when you arrive, you understand why. The courtyard is covered in feathers. Not fresh, of course. Not even real anymore. Just the echo of feather stone carvings, faded murals, reliefs with wings outstretched across every available surface. Falcons, ibises, herons, even geese, all caught mid-flight or mid-prayer depending on the angle. You tilt your head upward. Above the main doorway is a sun disk held by a pair of outstretched falcon claws. likely a nod to Horus the sky god, whose sharp-eyed gaze watched over the pharaohs. But step inside and the mood changes. This isn't a temple to royalty, it's a vault of reverence for birds. Birds, it turns out, were a very big deal. You pass alcoves where hundreds, yes hundreds, of bird-shaped mummies were once stored. Bins full of ibises, jars with pigeon remains, even elaborate falcon coffins shaped like missiles ready for resurrection. Many of these were votive offerings to Thoth and Horus, divine beings often represented in avian form. Historians still debate how these birds were selected. Were they bred in temple aviaries, captured wild, or simply scavenged from wherever feathers fluttered? The answer is likely all of the above. You kneel beside a small sarcophagus shaped like an ibis. The craftsmanship is exquisite. Lapis eyes, bronze beak feathers etched like whispers into the stone. It feels like something someone would display on a mantle, not bury underground. You lift the lid just a crack. Inside linen, tightly wound, something fragile at the center. Maybe bones, maybe not. Because, and here's a fun fact, many bird mummies examined in recent decades turned out to be nothing more than bundled sticks or collections of eggshells, or even mud. Yes, ancient mud. Some scholars believe this wasn't deceit, but symbolism, that the presence of birdness, a gesture toward the divine form, was more important than anatomical accuracy. Others argue it was just mass production corner cutting. Either way, you gently close the lid and stand again. The room hums with light filtered through broken ceiling stones. Patches of sun pool on the floor like puddles of gold. You walk slowly, your footsteps a soft shuffle across the dust. You imagine the scene 2,000 years ago. A woman kneels in this very spot, her hands cradling a wrapped bird. Maybe it was hers. Maybe she just found it. She whispers something to it, perhaps an apology, perhaps a plea. Then she places it on the altar and steps away. In that moment, her fear had a channel, her hope a shape, her grief a ritual. It's easy to think we've changed, but we still do this. Stuffed animals on children's graves, pet portraits on urns, ashes scattered in places once shared with a wagging tail or gentle wing. You turn to leave, and as you pass beneath the falcon claws again, you notice something carved between them, barely visible. A single feather, simple, stylized, and somehow more human than anything else in this place. Because in the end, it wasn't just about the gods. It was about how we cope with goodbye. You wander north now, following what once might have been a causeway. The stones beneath your feet are uneven but smoothed by centuries of sandals, hooves, and perhaps paws. There's a hush to this path, less traveled, less preserved. The kind of road where even the breeze seems to slow down out of respect. And then you see them, rows of shallow pits, long, low chambers dug into limestone, half collapsed, half forgotten. A sign handwritten on a warped wooden plank says simply, "Crocodile Catacombs." Yes, crocodiles. Because of course the ancient Egyptians mummified crocodiles. You step carefully through the threshold of a ruined arch, and the air grows heavy. You've entered a vault once filled with dozens, maybe hundreds of these sacred reptiles, each wrapped, preserved, and placed with ritualistic care. Some were tiny, hatchlings, others stretched 12 feet long, requiring multiple priests just to maneuver into the tomb. Your flashlight flickers across a row of dark shapes, now mostly skeletal but still formidable, and even in decay they look dignified, as if they died mid-glide, drifting through a slow river of the underworld. Why crocodiles? One word: Sobek. The crocodile-headed god of fertility, military prowess, and protection. Temples built in his name often had sacred lakes where real living crocodiles were kept fed, adorned, and treated as incarnations of the god himself. Visitors would offer food and prayers. The lucky ones might glimpse the crocodile sunning itself, a divine cameo. But even Sobek's emissaries had to die sometime. Historians still argue whether crocodile mummification was an honor bestowed only on special animals, or whether it devolved into factory-like sacrifice over time, as with other animal cults. At Kamombo, entire chambers have been uncovered, packed with croc mummies, many poorly wrapped, some just bones with no linen at all. You step closer to one intact specimen encased in resin and shroud. The linen is thick, coarse, like canvas. Its mouth is closed, sealed by centuries of stillness. You run a finger along the outline of its snout. It doesn't feel like death. It feels like awe. You picture the scene, torches, chants, maybe a chorus of drums. Priests lifting this predator like a treasure, wrapping it like a warrior, placing it in the tomb not as a corpse, but as a guardian. Because crocodiles were not pets. They were power. Even in death, they carried symbolic weight. The dangerous protector, the deity that could crush or shield, depending on your devotion. You sit on a stone slab nearby, letting your eyes adjust to the dimness, and you wonder what would it feel like to believe so deeply that even fear deserved a ceremony, that even danger could be sacred. It's not unlike how we build monuments to war, to hurricanes, to tragedies. We fear, but we frame, we ritualize what we cannot fully tame. And somehow, that makes it manageable. You rise again, brushing dust from your palms. As you move toward the exit, you spot a broken jar. Inside, the faint remains of a crocodile egg, so small, so fragile, and preserved with the same reverence as its armored kin. It's a reminder that in Egypt, death wasn't the end. It was a transfer, and even the jaws of a crocodile could open into eternity. You leave the crocodile tomb behind, and the world above greets you like an old friend, too bright, too open but familiar in its relentlessness. You shield your eyes and follow a narrow ridge that bends along the Nile's forgotten curve. And just when the heat starts to feel like a hallucination, something new catches your attention. A crumbling staircase leading down. No signs, no guides, just shadows pooling between each step like a dare. Naturally, you descend, and you enter the strangest place yet, the baboon crypts. Yes? Baboons. At first you think you've made a mistake. The walls are too smooth, the space too narrow. But then your light flickers across the far end of the chamber and you freeze. Because staring back at you, eye to empty eye, is a linen-wrapped figure. Its snout is unmistakable. This was once a sacred baboon. You've seen them on temple walls, always near the god Thoth, sometimes perched on scales of judgment, sometimes howling at the sun. They were believed to be wise, observant, even judicial. Their shrieks were interpreted as praise to the dawn, their posture a mirror of meditation. And so, of course, the Egyptians honored them, not just in art, but in preservation. Historians still debate the relationship. Were they trained, tamed, worshipped? Excavations reveal they were mummified in clusters, sometimes positioned upright, like seated monks. Other times curled like children, arms bound gently over chests. Some wore golden masks. You step closer. One bundle has traces of blue pigment near the eyes, lapis perhaps. Another is wrapped in diamond-patterned linen, as if someone took particular care with the weave. But not all stories are kind. Recent CT scans show many baboons had broken bones, likely from captivity, malnutrition, injuries from tight bindings. This wasn't just reverence, it was also ritual on a schedule. Mass breeding, mass death, and perhaps mass indifference. You crouch near a corner niche, where one particularly small baboon lies, its feet no longer than your thumb. It's hard to tell if it was an infant or just underdeveloped. Either way, someone wrapped it, placed it here, and whispered something over it. You like to believe it was a goodbye, because even systems, especially sacred ones, leave space for tenderness. And here's the strange part: in many of these crypts, Baboons were buried alongside human infants. No one knows why. Was it symbolic, a cosmic pairing, a shared soul path into the afterlife? Historians argue about it naturally. Some say it was coincidence. Others suspect a more spiritual link, that the Egyptians believed certain souls were born half beast, half divine. You sit a while longer listening to the quiet. It's not silence, it's memory. You imagine a priest, his hands stained with incense resin, kneeling here to tuck the linen around a baboon's ears. Maybe he wasn't thinking about gods. Maybe he was just doing his job. Maybe he felt tired that day. Maybe he prayed for forgiveness. You'll never know. But this place, this crypt carved by hand for creatures with laughter in their lungs, makes you pause. Because death here wasn't uniform. It was layered, holy and hurried, sacred and industrial, loving and sometimes cruel. You step back into the light, your eyes taking longer to adjust this time. And for the first time today, you hear it. A single bird call in the distance. Shrill, high, wild. It's almost funny. You've spent the day surrounded by stillness, but life, messy, unwrapped, untamed, still insists on being heard. The sun now slants lower across the Nile's dry shoulders, casting long fingers of light through broken pillars and bent reeds. You follow their direction almost without thinking. Feet soft on the sand led toward what looks like a small hill, but turns out to be a dome of bones. Not human, not feline, not reptilian. You're standing at the outer edge of the ibis necropolis, and if you weren't so tired, you might laugh out loud. Because of all the creatures worshipped, preserved, and mummified in Egypt, none rival the ibis in sheer volume. Millions, literally. The ancient Egyptians turned bird burial into an art form and an industry. You ease down the slope and into the crypt's entrance. The air here smells different. Less of decay, more of minerals and feathers dried 1,000 times over. The passage is narrow, lined with niches carved like cubbyholes. In each, a jar. Some small, some surprisingly large. Some ornate, painted with glyphs and depictions of the ibis with its curved beak poised like a quill. Others plain as a mud brick. You crouch beside one, wiping off a crust of sediment. Inside ash, feather, a single papery bone. It's impossible to believe this was once a living creature that flew across the Nile Delta hunting frogs and beetles, wading through reed beds, and then one day was offered up to the priests of Thoth. You've heard the name before God of writing wisdom and the moon. A sharp dresser, owl-eyed, and often portrayed with an ibis head. His followers believed that offering these birds brought favor in judgment and clarity in knowledge. So the ibis became currency. People paid for them, raised them, bought them mummified, ready to prey. Temple complexes housed entire aviaries just to meet demand. And archaeological digs have revealed something wild: millions of ibis mummies stacked like library scrolls, carefully packed, faith wrapped in linen. Historians still argue whether these birds were all sacred, or if the devotion devolved into a system of spiritual mass production. You sit on a bench built into the tomb wall, your back against rough stone. It's easy to romanticize this, to imagine each bird sent off with chants and incense. But modern research tells another story. Many ibis mummies were incomplete. Bones jumbled, wrappings hasty, sometimes just a single wing or beak wrapped in cloth to pass as a full bird. Even belief had a quota. You trace your fingers across a faded inscription nearby. It reads, "He who brings the bird brings the word." Maybe it was meant literally, scribe meets sacrifice. Or maybe it was poetic, a prayer to be heard by a god who listened best through feathers. The ground here crunches underfoot, not from stones, but from the dry shells of beetles, long since stripped of magic. You move slowly, reverently, and then you find it, an unwrapped ibis skeleton laid out in a shallow box. It's fragile, yes, but whole. The beak is long, graceful. You imagine it probing a tide pool, catching a flash of silver. You imagine it dying in a sunbeam. Or maybe it didn't. Maybe it was taken, chosen, or simply caged and bred for death. You can't know. But even here, even now, it commands your attention. Because no matter how many were buried, each bird flew once. Each bird felt wind. And in a way, so do you. You stand and a warm gust pushes through the chamber from some forgotten shaft. It smells faintly of papyrus and river mud. You close your eyes, and for a heartbeat, you understand to bury a bird was to send a message on wings to hope it carried your doubts, your debts, your desires into the hush of night where gods maybe still listened. You surface from the ibis crypt with a faint coating of dust on your arms like some badge of passage. The sky is darker now, all brass and purple, and even the wind seems to walk more slowly. But there's one last path. It's less a road and more a seam stitched into the side of a forgotten bluff. You follow it because, well, you've come this far. And that's how you find the animal embalming workshop. It's not majestic. No golden statues, no lotus-scented corridors, just clay basins, stone benches, and drains leading down into the earth. You step inside. It smells faintly of resin and salt. This is where the sacred pets were processed, not displayed, not honored, prepared. Because mummifying animals wasn't just about wrapping, it was about chemistry, natron, palm wine, myrrh, bitumen, all blended and applied with remarkable skill. In fact, many animal mummies are better preserved than their human counterparts. You crouch near a low table with groove marks worn deep. You imagine a priest or perhaps an apprentice setting down a small jackal's body, its legs splayed gently, the first incision made, organs removed with hands steadied by practice. Historians still argue, you murmur, whether this was sacred work or just labor. And that's the uncomfortable truth. For every cat wrapped with tenderness, there may have been 10 rushed, stacked, wrapped, sold. There were markets, price tiers, sales pitches. Some temples even outsourced the work. One archaeologist called it divine manufacturing. But within the grind, there were moments of grace. You find a clay pot labeled in faded hieratic script. Inside dried petals, likely lotus. It smells faintly floral, absurdly out of place. Maybe it was used to mask odor. Or maybe it was just kind. You like to think someone wanted the little creatures to leave the world with sweetness. You walk slowly now, tracing finger over a slab where someone scratched a rough paw print into the surface. Maybe they were testing a pigment, maybe it was a child, or maybe it was a final joke even he approves. There's one basin near the center with deep staining bitumen. Thick and black, it still glistens when the light hits it right. You step close and look in. Your reflection stares back, warped and silent. And you wonder, not for the first time, if this ritual was for the gods, or for us. To preserve, yes, but also to cope. Because what is embalming if not an act of hope? A way of saying, don't go, even as time pulls away. You turn toward the exit. The shadows fall long and the stars begin to scatter like unburied grains across the sky. Somewhere nearby, a dog barks sharp and real, a reminder that not everything ancient has disappeared. And you, walking out of the last chamber of the day, carry all of it with you, the sacred and the mass-produced, the whispered prayers and the price tags, the animal gods and the humans who needed them. The wind now rustles gentler through the reed grass, brushing your skin like linen in a forgotten drawer. You stand still somewhere between tombs and temple walls and take one long, slow breath of air that smells like dust, salt, and memory. You've reached the edge of it all. But just before you turn back, there's one last stop. The pet cemetery. Yes, it exists. And no, it's not a modern concept. You follow a gentle slope down toward what looks like a rock garden, flat stones arranged in rows, barely marked. Most carry no hieroglyphs, no gilded script, but some have carved outlines, little cats curled up, dogs, mid-leap monkeys clutching fruit, and beneath each, a creature once loved. This isn't the realm of gods or offerings. This is the realm of companions. And as you kneel beside one particular marker, shaped like a curled-up dog, you feel the quiet shift. Not reverence, not fear, just affection. You remember the dog statues, the collars, the bowls carved with names like Neferti and Khufu's shadow. These weren't just sacred symbols, they were friends, guards, playmates. Some were buried with their owners, wrapped in the same linens. Others were given solo tombs inscribed with lines like, "He came when I called. He knew my voice." And isn't that just the softest ache, that in a world obsessed with eternity, the most touching line is one about recognition? Historians still argue whether all these pets were truly mourned, or whether the rich simply extended their wealth into the afterlife through elaborate funerals. But you choose to believe in the simple truths: a scratched ear, a shared meal, a paw pressed to a palm. You glance across the rows and imagine a city full of life dogs darting through courtyards, monkeys climbing roof beams, cats slipping into baskets of grain. And when those lives ended, someone cared enough to mark the spot, to say, "You mattered." You stretch out on the warm stone, now arms behind your head. The stars are brighter here, away from electric distraction. No humming engines, just night, just crickets, just the occasional far-off cry of something alive and curious. You realize something. This whole journey, the mummified mice, the perfumed greyhounds, the ibis stacked like scrolls, it wasn't about death. It was about keeping company, about not being alone even when everything else fades. And as your breath slows and your eyes flutter with the weight of sleep, you hold one final thought. Even in an empire built for gods, someone once whispered goodnight to a cat. So now, as the silence thickens around you, let your breath grow slower, softer, like sand falling through fingers. You're lying under the same stars that watched over those ancient stones, those sacred tombs, those lovingly wrapped paws and feathers. You've wandered through crypts and workshops, through myths and marketplaces, and now you get to rest. Let the memory of warm jackals and perfumed collars linger. Let the echo of those old footpaths hum faintly behind your thoughts. You've earned this quiet, and maybe someone once laid their hand on a small wrapped bundle, whispered a name, and hoped it would find peace. That same wish is with you now, so let your shoulders sink, let your face soften, and let sleep come easy like a silent procession towards something kind. I'll be here the next time you need a story or a place to rest. Good night, traveler of time. End of script. Sweet dreams.